You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Well, happy Monday evening, folks. I hope you survived the weekend, had a good weekend. I did. My wife was gone with one of my children at camp for Cub Scouts, and the other two went up with their grandmother to visit her at the lake, and so I had a quiet weekend. It was kind of nice. I spent the most of it, however, cleaning my house. If you've ever had 5 children, 5 people, living in a house that probably could use 2 more rooms and a family room, then you know what I'm talking about. By the way, this is Scotty Roberts. You're listening to the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over and see all the goodness that is Odyssey Radio. At the same time, while you're listening, you can come on over and watch the simulcast video over on my YouTube channel. And the best part about that video is not so much just staring at my face and the occasional photograph I'll put up for an hour, but joining the chat room that is live. It's going on right now during this show. And so come on over to youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. And I think for the audio audience, you're going to see some different advertisements at the break than what I play here. I play a big ad for my artwork and my illustration and design business, advertising, marketing, that kind of things on the video. But for those of you in the audio, I just want you to remember that I do art, illustration, design, book cover design, book interior layout, illustration. I do a lot of kids' book illustrations, and I do logo design and all of that kind of thing. I've been doing that for now over 40 years. And I was for near 30 years in advertising and publishing, and I've been for the last 15 years, I have been a freelance on my own. And so that's what I do for a living. If you need any of those types of designs, that type of work done, come and visit my website, scottallenroberts.com. And Allen is A-L-A-N. Because there's so many different ways to spell it. So come and visit my site, see all the stuff I do, and if you are in need of good corporate design, corporate identity, logo design, book cover design, illustration work, that type of stuff, that's what I do. Come and visit. So I think I had a graphic for that at one time, but those who would need to see the graphic are going to see that all during the break anyway, during my advertisement. So that's it. That's all I want to say, and we'll get on to some business now. One of the things I want to say, and this is off the top of my head, I didn't put this together. I wasn't even sure I was going to mention anything about current events. But I will say this, that start looking into, I encourage you to look into, and maybe we'll take a day, maybe tomorrow, maybe sometime this week, and talk about this whole, not counterculture, this whole cancel culture movement that is going on right now. I had somebody in some of my public posts today say, well, how does it feel to be on the end of the assimilation? And I said, now, maybe you're just speaking rhetorically and you're offering up a devil's advocate, but I would think that in this nation, we have evolved beyond the point of, there, now it's your turn. How does it feel? Well, it's not my turn because I wasn't there when it originally happened. So there is nothing to try to assimilate me into. And this was in response to a post I put up that in Seattle, Washington, they've now got some kind of how to lose your whiteness course that's very serious. If you're so tired of your whiteness, here's how to blend in better. And it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever looked at. And so without getting into that in detail, I'm proud of my whiteness. It's how I was born. It's my heritage. Just as a black person can be proud of their blackness. It's how they were born. Asians, Native American, you just across the board. Be proud of who you are. I saw the best little video that had no words other than signs that the guy was holding up. He just had music playing. He was a black American holding up signs talking about, it's not about black or white, it's about dark versus light. What's the lightness in your life? What's the light in America? It's the fact that we have overcome these things that we have done that have been atrocious through history. We've overcome the things that we've done that were counter to what we proposed in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence. We said one thing, we did another thing, but we've overcome those things. It's because the founders, again, I will say, were genius futurists. They knew from the moment they started that we've declared all men being equal, therefore we would have to dehumanize black American, who were slaves mostly at that time, in order to demonize them, in order to make them not equal. And they realized how wrong that was. And they worked toward ending that, even though many of them couldn't accomplish that in their own lifetimes. They set the stage. It's like saying any president of the United States is not responsible for creating jobs. He's responsible for creating an atmosphere in the country that promotes the creation of jobs. Now, that's the same thing with what the founders were doing. They created an atmosphere, a nation where these things could evolve into being. And so that's where we've come so far. And no, it's not my turn. It's not our turn to be assimilated. We're all together. We're all one. We're all Americans. And we should be striving to make America better. Not to say, my ancestors were wronged by your ancestors, or even 10 years ago, my people were oppressed by this particular governmental law that has not been changed. Or in pockets of our society, that there are people who are racist. To me, that's not systemic. That is inherent in the human heart. Humans are by nature. We can be good, but we can do very bad things. And so we move beyond that. We try to keep fixing things. We try to keep making things better. But in the process, we cannot erase our culture. We cannot erase our history. We say, we are here now because we remember our past. We remember who we were, what we've come from, how we've evolved out of that. And in some areas, we haven't evolved out of that. There are still backward-thinking people in this country. There are backward-thinking people in power in this country. There are those, believe it or not, who would love to see, who preach one thing on the surface, but don't want to see black America rise out of where it is. They want to keep them there because that's their voting bloc. We're fighting for you, and we have been for 60 years, but we've won nothing for you. So most of these politicians you see nowadays jumping on the BLM wagon or all of this counterculture stuff, this cancel culture stuff, they don't believe that stuff. They're using it to advance themselves politically with a voting bloc. They're pandering. Watch for that. Use your minds, use your brains, think through these things. We're Americans first. And we break down the other problems. We solve them as we go along the way. Just have that as the goal. We're going to solve these problems. We're going to move on and be a better country every day as a result of it. Coffee. But that's all I've got to say on that. at the beginning now. Let's move on into stuff. We're gonna wrap up this section of Native American history, the view of the conquering of the American West by the Native American culture. We're going to look into that, and sorry, I'm so professional, I didn't turn off my phone. Let me take care of that right now so it doesn't ding and beep and ring and stuff like that during the course of this show. And boom, there, we're off. And I want to finish up this little section today and maybe start getting into the next section. This is going to be a long series on Native America. I want you to get something out of this, and maybe it's something that many of you have already expressed to me that you're already getting out of this, and that is, I didn't know that about our history. I'm going to find a way to get Reuben Fasthorse on here, and I want to talk to him, interview him, and get a little more of his insight onto this. And while Reuben and I have been dear friends for over 20 years, he and I are on different ends of the political spectrum, but we have so much agreement in the middle. And we look for ways to find love, agreement, unity between each other. We might differ on the president. We might differ on this or that thing, but we agree on most things. And so I want to get him on to talk about some of this. And we'll do that in the near future. If I can wrangle it this week, we'll do it this week yet. But I think this is an important series. I could talk about this probably for the next 6 months straight. So here's the plan. We're going to go through some of these incidents, some of these events that took place in Native American history, mostly in the 19th century, middle 1800s, to the end of the 1800s. We're going to focus on that and talk about what really happened behind the taking of the American West. And but we're going to punctuate it we'll hit different topics on different days. We'll see where we have a good place to break, and I'll jump into something else for a day or two. But be prepared to know that this is going to be a long series that we're covering. There's a lot of meat to this. So, having said all that, let's jump into where we left off last Friday. And I'm going to recap just a little bit because it's been 3 days since we talked about this. Now, remember, after the Powder, I'm sorry, not the Powder River. That's the next section, by the way. After the Sand Creek Massacre, remember the Native Americans, they regrouped and they started saying, "We're no longer interested in peace. You lied to us. You attacked us unprovoked. You killed our women, our children. Your soldiers did." This is to the United States, to whites as they called it, the Eastern whites. "You've taken our land. You've taken our lives. We have tried to stand for peaceful relations with you, yet you lied to us and you used our appeal for peace and our acting peaceably in order to massacre us." And this is where Chivington and Anthony and Governor Evans of Colorado all had to answer for this later. And the council, of course, got together and they started plundering up and down the Platte Route. And they started attacking Indian or whites and soldiers when they saw them. They attacked, they just tore down telegraph wires and burned the poles and tore them down. They burned telegraph stations. They burned outposts. And they became the stereotypical savage Indians that you would see in the old movies, always attacking. You always had to be aware. And you were the innocent white settler. But the problem was the white settlers kept infringing on their land. And then the white government, the white army, tried to murder them all. And now these chiefs are all saying, we are no longer about peace. Peace is done. You're coming back to us after murdering our women and children in cold blood, attacking them unprovoked, when we were seeking peace, when we were flying Black Kettle's American flag above his lodge. You still attacked us, and you still opened fire, and you still killed us. We're done. We're done. And so Black Kettle didn't want to go on these raids, and some 400 Cheyenne, mostly old women and children, and a few badly wounded warriors agreed to follow him southward, south of the Arkansas River, where they felt it was safe from the U.S. soldiers. And George Bent, the white Indian trader, said his farewells. And this last remnant of his mother's people, the Cheyenne. And he says, I went around among the lodges and I shook hands with Black Kettle and all my friends. These lodges under Black Kettle moved south of the Arkansas and joined the southern Arapaho, the Kiowas, and the Comanches. And with about 300 Sioux and Arapaho, the Cheyenne, including Yellow Woman and the Bent brothers, moved northward, and they were exiled into a land that few of them had ever seen before. And along the way, they had fights with soldiers who marched out from Fort Laramie. But the alliance was too strong for the soldiers, because the Southern Cheyenne now had started allying with the Northern Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Sioux. And so there was about 3,000 Sioux and Arapaho and Cheyenne, and they moved north. And the Indians brushed off the U.S. soldiers as though they were coyotes snapping at the mighty buffalo's heels. And when they reached the Powder River country, the Southern Cheyennes were welcomed by their kinsmen, the Northern Cheyenne. And the Southerners, who wore cloth blankets and leggings, traded with the white men, thought the Northerners looked very wild in their buffalo robes and their buckskin leggings, because they weren't doing that. They were standing apart. The Northern Cheyenne wrapped their braided hair with strips of red-painted buckskin. You remember we talked about this the other day, Friday. They wore crow feathers on their heads. They used so many Sioux words that the Southern Cheyenne had difficulty understanding them. The Southern Cheyenne were so pursuant of peace over the years prior to this that they were losing parts of their language. They were assimilating into white America, at least the way the white government wanted them to assimilate. And they had difficulty understanding. Morning Star, who was a leading chief of the Northern Cheyenne, had lived and hunted so long with the Sioux that almost everyone called him by his Sioux name, Dull Knife. And at the first, the Southerners camped at the Powder River, about a half a mile apart from the Northerners. But there was so much visiting back and forth between these tribal settlements that they started pitching their tents together, their lodges together. And they had tribal circle with clans grouped together. From that time on, there was little talk of Southerners or Northerners among the Cheyenne. They just became the Cheyenne. And in spring of 1865, when they moved their ponies over to Tongue River for better grazing, they camped near Red Cloud's Oglala Sioux. And the Cheyenne from the south had never seen so many Indians camped all together. More than 8,000 of them at Red Cloud's encampment. And the days and the nights were filled with hunts and ceremonies and feasts and dances. George Bent later told of inducting Young Man Afraid of His Horses, a Sioux, into his Cheyenne clan. The Crooked Lances was his clan, the Crooked Lances. And this indicated how close the Sioux and the Cheyenne were at that time. And although each tribe kept its own laws and customs, these Indians had come to think of themselves as the people. And you'll hear that many times even now in modern speak, the people. And confident of their power and sure of their right to live as they pleased. And white invaders were challenging them on the east in Dakota and on the south along the Platte River, but they were ready to meet all these challenges. Red Cloud said this: "The Great Spirit raised both the white man and the Indian. I think he raised the Indian first. He raised me in this land, and it belongs to me. The white man was raised over the great waters, and his land was over there. And since they crossed the sea, I have given them room. But there are now white people all about me. I have but a small spot of land left. The Great Spirit told me to keep it." And through the springtime, the Indians sent scouting parties down to watch the soldiers who were guarding the roads and the telegraph lines along the Platte. And the scouts reported many more soldiers than usual. Some of them were prowling northward along the Bozeman Trail through the Powder River country where they were settled. And Red Cloud and the other chiefs decided it was time to teach the soldiers a lesson. They would strike them at the point where they were the farthest south, a place the white men called Platte Bridge Station. Now, because the Cheyenne warriors from the south wanted revenge for the relatives massacred at Sand Creek, most of them were invited to go along on the expedition. And the Roman Nose of the Crooked Lances, this is Black Kettle's settlement, was their leader, Roman Nose. And he rode with Red Cloud, Dull Knife, and Old Man Afraid of His Horses, father of Young Man Afraid of His Horses. Almost 3,000 warriors formed the war party, 3,000 of them, and among them were the Bent brothers, painted and dressed for battle. And on July 24th, they reached the hills overlooking the bridge across the North Platte. At the opposite end of the bridge was the military post. It was a stockade, a stage station, and a telegraph office. And about 300 soldiers were inside the stockade. And after looking at the place through their field glasses, which they had acquired from the whites, the chiefs decided they would burn the bridge, cross the river at a shallow ford below, and then lay siege to the stockade. But first they would try to draw the soldiers outside with decoys and kill as many as possible. See, this is all they were bent on now. It's now revenge. It's not looking for peace. It's not a way to find a peaceful way to live with the whites or to work with the white soldiers and the white government. It was now about killing them. They have invaded, they have taken, they have stolen, they have murdered. We're done seeking peace. We are about revenge. And so 10 warriors went down in the afternoon, but the soldiers wouldn't come out of their stockade. They tried to draw them out. Next morning, another set of decoys lured the soldiers out on the bridge, but they would come no farther. On the third morning, to the Indians' surprise, a platoon of cavalrymen marched out of the fort, crossed the bridge, and turned westward at a trot. Now you can imagine the conversation when orders were given to do this. They knew that they were going to be under very close surveillance by the Indians. I don't think they knew there were 3,000 of them over the hill. And in a matter of seconds, several hundred Cheyenne and Sioux were mounted on their ponies and swarming down the hills toward the Bluecoats. "As we went into the troops," George Bent said, "I saw an officer on a bay horse rush past me through the dense clouds of dust and smoke." You'll remember this from Friday. And he said he had an arrow sticking in his forehead, and his face was streaming with blood. And this fatally wounded officer was Lieutenant Casper Collins. And a few of the cavalrymen escaped and reached a rescue platoon of infantrymen on the bridge. Cannon from the fort broke off further pursuit by the Indians, and while the fighting was going on, some of the Indians still on the hills discovered why the cavalrymen had marched out of the fort. They'd been riding to meet a wagon train approaching from the west, and in a few minutes the Indians had the wagon train surrounded, but the soldiers dug in under the wagons, put up a stubborn fight. During the first minutes of fighting, Roman Nose's brother was killed. And when Roman Nose heard of this, he was angry for revenge. He called out for all the Cheyennes to prepare for a charge. "We're going to empty the soldiers' guns," he shouted. And Roman Nose was wearing his medicine bonnet and shield, and he knew that no bullets could strike him. And he led the Cheyennes into a circle around the wagons, that traditional thing that you've seen replicated in movies. And as the circle tightened closer to the wagons, the soldiers emptied all their guns at once, and then the Cheyenne charged straight for the wagons and killed every last soldier inside that circle. They were disappointed by what they found in the wagons. Nothing was there but soldiers' bedding and mess chests. We got to stop for the first half. Sit tight during this break. We'll be back and pick this up right where we left off.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
All right, gang, thanks for sitting on through that break. This is Scotty Roberts. Welcome to the Intrepid radio program, our second segment for tonight. And you can find us audibly at Odyssey Radio, ODYSY1.com. Go on over there. You can find out all the different outlets, iTunes, Spreaker, all the other ones that are out there. You'll find links to those to listen to this show in its audio format. You can also come over to my YouTube channel. Join the video simulcast along with the live chat room that's going on during the show right now over at youtube.com/Mr. Scotty Roberts. All right, let's get right back into this. We're talking about how Roman Nose and the other Indians with him were attacking. They attacked a column that came out that were going out to meet a wagon train that was bringing supplies in to the fort. And if you were here during the first segment, I won't recap the whole thing, but this is what's going on. And that night in Red Cloud's camp, and Red Cloud and the other chiefs decided that they'd taught the soldiers to fear the power of the Indians. And so they returned to the Powder River country. They left off 3,000 warriors. And so they returned to Powder River, hopeful that the white men would now obey the Laramie Treaty. They were just sustaining and preserving their treaty rights, and that they would quit prowling without permission into the Indians' country north of the Platte River. So remember, now they're not about peace anymore. They're about letter of the law. You cross that line, we will kill you. So meanwhile, Black Kettle and the last remnants of the Southern Cheyenne had moved south of the Arkansas River. And they joined Little Raven's Arapaho, who by this time had heard of the Sand Creek Massacre, and they were mourning friends and relatives that they lost there. Now, during the summer of 1865, their hunters found only a few buffalo below the Arkansas, but they were afraid to go back north where the big herds grazed between the Smoky Hill and the Republican rivers, which was technically their land. So late in summer, runners and messengers began coming from all directions. They were looking for Black Kettle and Little Raven. Suddenly, they'd become very important again. Some white officials had journeyed from Washington to find the Cheyenne and the Arapaho and tell them the Great Father, the President, and his council were filled with pity for them. The government officials wanted to make a new treaty. How would you feel at this point if you were an Indian at this time, after all that had happened up to this point? Now, this is post-Abraham Lincoln's death. This is the summer of 1865. And although the Cheyenne and the Arapaho had been driven from Colorado, and settlers were claiming their lands already, it's like the vultures were already waiting, it seemed that the titles to the lands were not clear because of the treaty. So by the law of the old treaties, it would have been proven that Denver City itself stood upon Cheyenne and Arapaho land. It's kind of like what we're seeing today. We talked about last week, the Supreme Court just a week ago. Last week, on Tuesday, I think it was, had ruled that in Oklahoma, that the Creek Reservation was upheld by treaty rights. It was a different issue that was brought, but the Supreme Court said the United States has to keep its word. And you know what the implications of that is? Do you know how many white settlers, which are now cities within the Creek Reservation land, and then what the implications of the four other, the Choctaw, the Kiowa, the Seminole, the other reservations that are all bunched together in Oklahoma? If all of that is true and they're upholding the treaty rights, everybody who lives in about a half of the state of Oklahoma is on Native American reservation land and are under the jurisdiction then of the reservations. This has huge implications, but this is what's going on now. And they'd been driven from Colorado, the Arapaho and the Cheyenne, and the settlers were claiming their land already. But the law of the old treaties, it could be proven that Denver itself stood on a Cheyenne and Arapaho land. And so the government wanted all Indian land claims in Colorado extinguished. What do you think Governor Evans was after before the Sand Creek massacre? He wants their rights extinguished. The government did, so that white settlers could be certain they owned the land once they claimed it. So it's all about owning land. Black Kettle and the Little Raven wouldn't agree to meet with the officials until they heard from the little white man, William Bent. He told them that he had tried to persuade the United States to give the Indians permanent rights to the buffalo country between Smoky Hill and the Republican, but the government refused to do this because a stage line and later a railroad would pass through that country, and bringing more white settlers. And the Cheyenne and the Arapaho would have to live south of the Arkansas River. Isn't this what they already did with the permanent Indian frontier? Anything west of the Mississippi? We mean west of the 95th parallel? Or meridian? They've already done this. The Indians have already seen this. So they wouldn't agree. They wouldn't even agree to meet. And in the dying grass moon, as it was called, Black Kettle and Little Raven met the commissioners at the mouth of the Little Arkansas. The Indians had seen two of these treaty makers before, Black Whiskers Sanborn and White Whiskers Harney, and they believed Sanborn to be a friend, but they remembered Harney had massacred the Brule Sioux at the Blue Water in Nebraska in 1855, 10 years earlier. So agents Murphy and Leavenworth were there, and a straight-talking man, James Steele, rope thrower Kit Carson, who had separated the Navajo from their tribal lands, was also there. Now Gray Blanket Smith, who had endured the ordeal of the Sand Creek with them, came to translate, and the little white man was there, George Bent, to do the best he could for them. "Here we are all together, Arapaho and Cheyenne," Black Kettle said. "But few of us. We are one people. All my friends, the Indians that are holding back, they are afraid to come in. They are afraid they will be betrayed, as we and I have been before. It will be very hard, a very hard thing, to leave the country that God gave us," Little Raven added in. "Our friends are buried there, and we hate to leave these grounds. There is, in other words, he was saying our ancestors are there. This is part of their spiritual belief. There's something strong for us. That fool band of soldiers that cleared out our lodges and killed our women and children. This is hard on us. There at Sand Creek, White Antelope and many other chiefs lie there. Our ancestors, our brethren, our women, our children lie there. Our lodges were destroyed there, and our horses were taken from us there, and I do not feel disposed to go right off to a new country and leave them." So James Steele answered, we all fully realize that it's hard for any people to leave their homes and graves of their ancestors, but unfortunately for you, gold has been discovered in your country, and a crowd of white people have gone there to live. And a great many of these people are the worst enemies of the Indian, men who do not care for their interests, and who would not stop at any crime to enrich themselves. So in essence, what he's doing, he's justifying the breaking of the treaty by people who just want the gold that's under the ground. And they wouldn't stop at any crime to enrich themselves, Steele went on. These men are now in your country, in all parts of it, and there's no portion where you can live and maintain yourselves but what you'll come in contact with them. The consequences of this state of things are that you are in constant danger of being imposed upon, and you have to resort to arms in self-defense. Under the circumstances, there is, in the opinion of the Commission, no part of the former country large enough where you can live in peace. If that justifying speech doesn't piss you off, nothing will. If that were your home, and somebody said, well, we know this is your land, you own it, it's yours, you work it, you live on it, you hunt on it, your ancestors are buried on it, your loved ones are interred there. But there's people that want your land. They want the gold, or they want the oil, they want the sand pit or the rock quarry that's under your ground, and so they're going to keep moving in and take it, and you're going to want to defend it, but there's just not enough of it left for you to keep. That's the justification that's being given. So we're going to take your land away. Now Black Kettle responded to this and said, our forefathers, when alive, lived all over this country. They did not know about doing wrong. Since then they have died and gone I don't know where. We've all lost our way. Our great Father sent you here with his words to us, and we take hold of them. Although the troops have struck us, we throw it all behind, and we're glad to meet you in peace and friendship. Remember, he's a little different than the Cheyenne, the Southern Cheyenne and the Arapaho who moved north and joined the Oglala and the others. Black Kettle was always about peace. I'm accepting that things are what they are. All we have is to make peace. Although the troops have struck us, we throw it all behind, and we're glad to meet you in peace and friendship. What you have come here for, and what the President has sent you for, I don't object to, but say yes to it. The white people can go wherever they please, and they'll not be disturbed by us. And I want you to let them know, we are different nations. But it seems as if we're but one people, whites and all. Again, I take you by the hand and I feel happy. These people that are with us are glad to think that we have peace once more and can sleep soundly and that we can live. This is how Black Kettle responded to this. And so they agreed to live south of the Arkansas River. and sharing land that belonged to the Kiowas. And on October 14th of 1865, the chiefs and the headmen of what remained of the Southern Cheyenne and the Arapaho signed the new treaty, agreeing to perpetual peace. Perpetual peace. Article 2 of the treaty read, as this is a quote from the treaty itself, "It is further agreed by the Indian parties hereto that henceforth they will and do hereby relinquish all claims or rights in and to the country bounded as follows, beginning at the junction of the North and the South Forks of the Platte River, thence up the North Fork to the top of the principal range of the Rocky Mountains, or to the Red Buttes, however you want to pronounce it, B-U-T-T-E-S. I think it's Buttes. The Red Buttes. Thence southwardly along the summit of the Rocky Mountains to the headwaters of the Arkansas River. Thence down the Arkansas River to the Cimarron crossing of the same. Thence to the place of beginning, which country they have originally owned and had claim to, and never to have relinquished the title thereto. And thus did the Cheyenne and the Arapaho abandon all claims to the territory of Colorado. And that, of course, was the real meaning of the massacre at Sand Creek. But this isn't where it ends, folks. Of course not. There was a song, and again, to sing it, I don't know how to sing it, but it's Henawashi, Ayuwe, Benawashi, Ayuwe. Benawashi, Ayuwe, ho etor, Auwelohe, o Sunkawaken, O Yawa, Yahweh. Hena, what? Reuben Fassors would be turning over in his grave if he were dead, listening to my pronunciations. Awe, Henawae, Henawae, as they would sing it. Eo, we, Huton, Auwelahohe, Heo, Heo. And it says, see them prancing, they come neighing, they come a horse nation. See them prancing, they come neighing, they come. Now, let's move on into the Powder River invasion. This is where this is going. In 1865, April 2nd, this is about 2 weeks before the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Confederates abandoned Richmond. April 9th, Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox. The Civil War ends. April 14th, a few days later, John Wilkes Booth assassinates President Lincoln. Andrew Johnson becomes the president. June 13th, President Johnson issues a proclamation for reconstruction of the former Confederate states. October, USS France to recall troops from Mexico. December 18th, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution abolishes slavery. Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland and Tolstoy's War and Peace are published. That's what's going on in the world around. Then you have this quote from Mapiu Luta, Red Cloud of the Oglala Sioux, whose voice was first sounded on this land. Voice of the red people who had but bows and arrows. What has been done in my country I did not want. I did not ask for it. White people going through my country. When the white man comes in my country, he leaves a trail of blood behind him. I have 2 mountains in that country, the Black Hills and the Bighorn Mountain. I want the Great Father to make no roads through them. I have told these things 3 times. Now I have come here to tell them the 4th time. Now, after returning to the Powder River country, following the Platte Bridge fight, the Plains Indians began preparing for their usual summer medicine ceremonies. The tribes camped near each other at the mouth of Crazy Woman's Fork of the Powder River. Farther north along that river and the Little Missouri were some Teton Sioux who had moved west that year to get away from General Sully's soldiers in the Dakotas. In Dakota. I keep saying Dakotas because it's the Dakotas now. Sitting Bull and his Hunkpapa people were there, and these cousins of the Oglala sent emissaries down for a big Sundance, the annual religious renewal of the Tetons. And while the Sundance was in progress, the Cheyenne held their medicine arrows ceremony, which lasted for 4 days. The arrow keeper unwrapped the 4 secret arrows from their coyote fur bag, and all the males in the tribe passed by to make an offering and pray to the arrows. Black Bear, one of the leading chiefs of the northern Arapaho, decided to take his people west to Tongue River. He invited some of the southern Arapaho who had come north after Sand Creek to go with them. He would set up a village on the Tongue River, he said, and have many hunts and dances before the coming of the cold moons. And so by late August of 1865, the tribes in the Powder River country were scattered from the Big Horns on the west to the Black Hills on the east, and they were so sure of the country's impregnability that most of them were skeptical when they first began hearing rumors of soldiers coming at them from 4 directions. And 3 of the soldiers' columns were under command of General Patrick E. Connor, who had transferred from Utah in May to fight Indians along the Platte route. And in 1863, Star Chief Connor had surrounded a camp of Paiutes on Bear River and butchered 278 of them. And for this he was hailed by the white man as a brave defender of the frontier from the red foe, quote unquote. 278 men butchered. In July of 1865, Connor announced that the Indians north of the Platte must be hunted like wolves. And he began organizing 3 columns of soldiers for an invasion of the Powder River country. Now remember, this new treaty was written by Black Kettle and those. They were signed by Black Kettle, and they're down in the south in Arkansas. But this relinquishes all this land. These guys didn't sign. In the Powder River country, and 1 column under Colonel Nelson Cole would march from Nebraska to the Black Hills of Dakota, and a 2nd column under Colonel Samuel Walker would move straight north from Laramie to link up with Cole in the Black Hills. The 3rd column, with Connor himself in command, would head in a northwesterly direction along the Bozeman Road toward Montana. And General Connor thus hoped to trap the Indians between his column and the combined forces of Cole and Walker. And he warned his officers to accept no overtures of peace from the Indians and ordered blankly, attack and kill every male Indian under 12 years of age. This was the command. And so early in August, the 3 columns were sent in motion. If everything went according to plan, they would rendezvous about September 1st on the Rosebud River in the heart of hostile Indian country. A 4th column, which had no connection with Connor's expeditions, was also approaching the Powder River country from the east, organized by a civilian, James A. Sawyer, to open up new overland routes. And this column had no objective other than to reach the Montana gold fields. Sawyers knew that he would be trespassing on Indian treaty lands, and he expected resistance, and therefore he had obtained 2 companies of infantrymen to escort his group of 73 gold seekers and 80 wagons of supplies. And it was about August 14th or the 15th when the Sioux and the Cheyenne, who were camped along the Powder River, first learned of Sawyer's approaching train. "Our hunters rode into camp, much excited," George Bent recalled afterward, and said soldiers were up the river. "Our village crier, a man named Bull Bear, mounted and rode about our camp, crying that soldiers were coming." They have every reason to be afraid of the soldiers, to be on guard for coming soldiers. So Red Cloud got in his herd, mounted and rode through the Sioux camp, crying the same thing for the Sioux. Everybody ran for ponies. At such times, a man always took any pony he wanted. If the pony was killed in the fight, The rider did not have to pay for its owner for it, but everything the rider captured in battle then belonged to the owner of the pony he rode. When all were mounted, we rode up the Powder about 15 miles, where we came upon Sawyer's road-building party, a big train of emigrants moving along with soldiers marching on each side of it. As part of their booty taken during the Platte Bridge fight, the Indians had brought back some army uniforms and bugles, and on leaving camp, George Bent hastily donned an officer's blouse, and his brother Charlie carried along a bugle. They thought these things might satisfy the soldiers and make them a little jumpy. About 500 Sioux and Cheyenne were in the war party, and both Red Cloud and Dull Knife went along. And the chiefs were very angry, as you can imagine they would be, that soldiers had come into their country without asking permission. So when they first sighted the wagon train, it was moving along between two hills. Remember, these are just people going to find gold. And not just, they're trespassing to do this, because they feel they have the right to do it because they have soldiers with them. And so when they first started this wagon train, it was moving along between two hills with a herd of about 300 cattle in the rear. The Indians divided and spread out along the opposite ridges, and at a signal being fired upon the soldiers' escorts. In a few minutes, the train formed in a circular corral, with the cattle herded inside, and the wagon wheels interlocked. And for 2 or 3 hours, the warriors amused themselves by creeping down the gullies and suddenly opening fire at close range. A few of the more daring riders galloped in close, circled the wagons, and swept out of range. After the soldiers started firing their 2 howitzers, the warriors kept behind little hillocks and uttering war cries and insulting the soldiers. Charlie Bent blew his bugle several times and shouted all the Anglo-Saxon profanity he could remember hearing used around his father's trading post. They taunted us in a most aggravating manner, one of the besieged gold seekers said afterwards. Some few of them could speak English well enough to call us all the vile names imaginable. That would have been George Bent. It's a little humorous when you think about it. So the wagon train couldn't move, but neither could the Indians get at it. And so at about midday, to end the stalemate, the chiefs ordered a white flag hoisted. A few minutes later, a man in buckskins came riding out of the wagon corral. Because the Bent brothers could speak English, they were sent down to meet the emissary. The man was a good-humored Mexican, Juan Sucé, and he was as much surprised by Bent's English as he was by George's blue uniform blouse. Sucé, who knew little English, had to use sign language, but he managed to make them understand that the commander of the wagon train was willing to parley with the Indian chiefs, and a meeting was quickly arranged. The Bents became interpreters now for Red Cloud and Dull Knife. Colonel Sawyers and the Captain George Williford came out from the corral with a small escort. Colonel Sawyer's title was honorary, but he considered himself in command of the wagon train. Captain Williford's title was genuine. His 2 companies of soldiers were galvanized Yankees, former Confederate prisoners of war. Now, Williford's nerves were on the edge. He was unsure of his men. He was unsure of his authority on the expedition. He glared at the blue uniform coat worn by the half-breed Cheyenne interpreter George Bent. Now, when Red Cloud demanded an explanation for the presence of soldiers in the Indians' country, Captain Williford replied by asking why the Indians had attacked peaceful white men. Charlie Bent, still embittered by the memories of Sand Creek, as I would be, and probably any of you would be, told Williford that the Cheyennes would fight all white men until the government hanged Colonel Chivington. Sawyers protested that he had not come to fight the Indians. He was seeking a short route to the Montana gold fields, and only wanted to pass through the country. I interpreted this to the chiefs, George Bent said afterward, and Red Cloud replied that if whites would go clear of his country and make no roads, it was all right. Dull Knife said the same for the Cheyenne, when both chiefs said for the officer Williford to take the train due west from this place, then turn north when he had passed the Big Horn Mountains. He would be out of their country. Sawyers protested. Here's the Indians saying, look, you're on our land without permission. We'll let you go through, but we need you to go over here to go around our land. That's all they're telling him. Go around. Sawyers protested. To follow such a route would take him too far out of his way. It would inconvenience him. He said he wanted to move north along the Powder River Valley to find a fort that General Connor was building there. This was the first news that Red Cloud and Dull-Knife had heard of General Connor and his invasion. They expressed surprise and anger that soldiers would dare build a fort in the heart of their hunting grounds. Seeing that the chiefs were growing hostile, Sawyers quickly offered them a wagon load of goods: flour, sugar, coffee, tobacco. Red Cloud suggested that gunpowder, shot, and caps be added to the list, but Captain Williford objected strongly. In fact, the military officer was opposed to giving the Indians anything at all. So finally the chiefs agreed to accept a full wagon load of flour, sugar, coffee, tobacco in exchange for granting permission for the train to move to Powder River. The officer told me, George Bent later said, to hold the Indians back away from the train, and he would unload the goods on the ground. He wanted to go on to the river and camp. This was at noon. After he reached the river and corralled his train there, another lot of Sioux came up from the village. The wagon load of goods had already been divided by the first party of Indians, so these newcomers demanded more goods. And when the officers refused, they began firing on the corral. And that's where we have to leave off with this story until tomorrow night. There's a lot more to this. So stay tuned. We'll see you in about 23 hours. Thanks for being here.